Good morning. My name is Mackenzie Costa. I'm the Global Startup Evangelist for Amazon Web Services. And first, I really just want to welcome everybody here to Startup Day, based here in London. This day is really built for you, the founders of startups who face really unique challenges, whether it comes to business needs or technical needs. We wanted to gather some of the industry's best VCs, serial entrepreneurs, and engineers to help share their experience, their knowledge, and their expertise with you. I want to point everybody to kind of the first place to go. If you haven't downloaded this app, get it. It'll be your ultimate guide for the next 2 days. It'll tell you what's happening, when it's happening, and a short description about the upcoming events. Most importantly, it allows you to kind of rate each session so you can figure out, give us feedback about how we can improve these in the future. We really want to keep tailoring each and every one of these sessions and events to your needs. Also, this entire day is broken out to help you identify which sessions are most relatable to you. So there's 3 sessions or 3 different themes going on throughout the day. So find the one that's the right fit for what you're seeking. So if you're looking for business guidance, there's a whole business innovation track. If there's customer engagement that you're after and you're curious about, we're going to kick that off after this morning's session. And if you're looking for more tech-based, you can join the AI track, where you'll learn things about how to build voice and chat-based interfaces. Let's talk about startups. So at AWS, why I'm most excited to work here is that we have more startups running and launching on AWS than any other platform in the world. There's a reason why more startups trust running their companies on top of AWS. And that's because as a startup, you move quickly, and you want a provider who's able to move just as quickly, innovate just as fast. And this is across every imaginable business segment. This is just a subset of the many startups that we have. But everything from fintech, if you look at companies like Bambora, there's consumer retail goods like Canary doing security devices, or Harry's, who they acquired a massive razor factory out of Germany, and now they're distributing these razors globally. You even have fintech companies like based here in London, such as Tandem. All these startups are really changing every imaginable industry, and they're doing it by leveraging the services of AWS today. I talk about pace of innovation, but this slide really visualizes that. This is a slide you might have seen before, but it's showing you every new service and feature we've released over the past 10 years in a year-over-year way to see it. Last year alone, that's 1,400 new services and features that you basically have access to. And this isn't just the large Fortune 500 companies. One of the core principles that we had when AWS launched was we wanted to put the power of technology that the largest companies in the world had and put that in the hands of not just the other corporations, but in the hands of the small startups, the thriving startups, and even like the individual in a dorm room who has an idea and they want to start building. This really democratizes all this technology and levels the playing field across all industries. And that's why it's really exciting to be building any startup today. I put a few of my favorite milestones along the bottom, and we can all pick and choose our favorites, but I want to think back to 2008. And if you're building a product back then, one of the common needs you need is a database, and we kind of take this all for granted, but RDS changed how we even have to think about or concern ourselves with managing this. To walk you down that path of history and that miserable experience we all had to face back in 2008, standing up clusters and doing master-slave replication and bin logs and hoping your backups worked and making sure that's all automated and you're testing your restores was really a full-time job. And 2009, RDS changed that. Now it's just a click of a button, you have a cluster, and you're off building your product, not managing these clusters. Well, that same approach to, hey, let's simplify this, let's take this heavy lifting, and let's allow our customers to focus on what's important, that's true across the entire stack. And that's what's really driven a lot of these other services and releases that have happened. So another great example is, think back to 2012, and you think about doing large, real-time streaming analytics. And that was really reserved for some of the largest tech companies in the world. I remember attending, I'm not going to go ahead just yet, but I remember going to Velocity and hearing about one of the large tech companies and how they're processing hundreds of millions of messages in real time. And it was one of the coolest talks to see. It was mind-blowing on what their engineering team was able to build in about 6 or 8 months. Well, that was a common need for a lot of companies back in 2013, and so we had our own internal tool that we're using for our purposes, and it was battle-tested, so we released it to the public. And that ended up being Kinesis back in 2013. Well, a gaming company that had a big need for this was Supercell. And for those who are unfamiliar, Supercell is a big gaming company out of the Nordics. They have Clash of the Clans. It just celebrated their 4th anniversary, and it's still one of the top 10 strategy games in the iTunes store today. This is a company that today, they're about 180 employees. And you look at one of their games, and this is basically what it is, real-time strategy. But there's a lot of data that's being generated by each one of these games. You're looking at like health points, damage being caused, where units are placed. And it's a multiplayer game. You have millions of people playing these games at any given time. And they needed a way to process all this inbound data. And they could have spent 8, 12 months building it in-house with a team of 50 or 100 engineers at the time. That's just not a good use of their resources. So they ended up using Kinesis for this. And this number is about 1.5 years, 2 years old, but at that time, they're processing 45 billion events per day. That's billion with a B of all these game-generated events. And they don't have somebody dedicated to processing this. They don't have someone dedicated to managing this cluster. They just spin up their Kinesis, set up a few shards, and it's handling this all for them. To give you comparison contrast, they were acquired back in 2016 for, I think, north of about $8.6 billion. But their main rival, Supercell has a team of about 180 employees. Their closest rival has over 1,400 employees. So it's really all about being as efficient as possible with your engineering teams and leveraging these managed services. Another company I like to talk about is Bustle. So actually, one of my former colleagues from Tumblr went and became a CTO here at Bustle a few years ago. For those unfamiliar with Bustle, they're an online media company based out of New York City. Today, about 3 years later, they have 80 million active users on it. They have 12 full-time developers and not a single person managing any kind of infrastructure whatsoever. Well, 2014 came around and Lambda was released, along with API Gateway. And this really introduced the notion of functions as a service, focusing on business logic and not building these massive applications. And Bustle at the time was running as a full Node.js application, but they're using traditional EC2 instances. And they said, well, what if we just shift this all over to completely serverless architecture? So they were a really early adopter of this. They saw numerous benefits and gains. First of all, they were paying at a sub-second pricing model. They had infinite scalability. But the biggest thing to them as an early-stage startup is it reduced their overall cost by about 80%. So again, there's no infrastructure they're managing. They're running it for much cheaper. And they did this for, first, their data ingestion about events, or events happening on their site. So you go to one of these sites and you're clicking on articles, you're reading articles. This is all user-generated data. 80 million users generating a lot of interesting events that you want to be aggregating and doing analytics on. So what they did is they chunked each one of these events up. They would send an API gateway. There's a Lambda function there that would break that apart into each individual piece. And then each Lambda function would run against each one of those events. And it would load it into all sorts of back-end systems, including marketing tools, campaign tools, analytics tools, but also throwing it into Kinesis and ending up in Redshift. And they ended up using QuickSight and building these dashboards that are available to everyone in their company. So every team can make product data-driven decisions about what their business should be building tomorrow and in the next 6 months. This is a great tweet from Tyler a couple months ago, but it's been so impactful within their organization that they're working on getting rid of the last 15 EC2 instances they have, which is just a massive Redis cluster. And they do lots of talks. You have the opportunity to hear Bustle talk about their serverless architecture and journey. It's great. There's lots of resources online. The last company I want to talk about is Segment. And Segment is a San Francisco-based startup. And what they do is, if you think about building any type of application today, it's really important to know what your users are doing, what's working, what's not working. So you want to be aggregating all sorts of these events, similar to what Bustle is doing. But the way that a lot of people do it today is you start with, let me add one library to send data to one of these backend systems, and then slowly over time you get more need for additional insights and additional tools. So a year, 2 years into your startup, pretty soon you have 15 or 20 different libraries and SDKs that you're basically using to funnel this data to different backend systems. And not only is that tedious to maintain, but it also ends up slowing down the load time and the experience for the end user. So Segment said, well, what if we could just be the proxy for that? What if you could just load Segment, send data to us, and then on our backend systems, you can decide where all that data and traffic's going to go. Segment, it allows you to basically send it to warehouses, multi-touch attribution systems, warehouses, email systems, wherever you want that data to live, and you do it with one simple API call. Segment has many, many customers, but it's not just small startups, it's large enterprises. And that produces kind of a unique challenge, which is this is now a startup that's dealing with not just the size of data that one enterprise is generating, but tens of thousands of enterprises are generating. So how do you deal with all that traffic in a reliable, scalable way? Well, traditionally, they were building on just instances. And they had this very manual process of provisioning new instances. There would be config issues when certain versions wouldn't match. That would cause weird data corruption issues and weird user behavior. And they needed something that they could move quickly with and really standardize across all of the different services they're offering. So imagine all these backend APIs and more. This slide auto-advanced at the exact right moment. That's incredible. So what they ended up doing is once they containerized this all locally in the dev environments, they needed some place to run these containers in production. And they looked at a lot of the open source offerings and tools, but they were already using a lot of the AWS services and looked at ECS, and it provided the simplicity and flexibility and scalability they needed to run these containers at scale. So today, at any given point, they have 25,000 tasks. And you can think of a task as an individual instance of a Docker container running. So 25,000 of these Docker containers running, ingesting all this data. That's comprised of over 300, or actually 382 services. And that's more services than they have employees in the company. And that's totaling about 160 billion events. So again, a small startup, this auto-advancing is killing me. But this, the fact that you have this small startup of a few hundred people who is able to process this volume of events and have the reliability and consistency to support the largest enterprises is really inspiring. This all comes back down to one theme that I'm trying to hit home here today. And it's summarized nicely by Jeff Bezos, of course, CEO of Amazon.com. And I'm going to do what you're not supposed to do and read a quote, just because I think it's this great of a quote, it deserves to be read. Jeff says that the reality, of course, today is that if you come up with a great idea, you don't get to go quickly to a successful product. There's a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting that stands between your idea and that success. Now, this quote isn't about startups. This quote isn't about specifically enterprises. It's about every single business out there. No matter what your idea is, this happens at any size organization, there's a lot of this undifferentiated heavy lifting. There's this underlying infrastructure that you have to manage and get the basic core building blocks in there to start working on that real product that matters, that real idea and vision that you started with. Well, fortunately, a lot of that heavy lifting falls within this whole umbrella of the 100+ services that we've been building at AWS. The advantage is because we've been working so closely with more startups than anyone else, we understand what the pain points are. All of these components are there to eliminate what the challenges and what the difficulties are of you building your next idea. So whether you're looking to build AR/VR apps using Sumerian, whether you're looking to build, train, deploy machine learning models using SageMaker, which gives you a whole end-to-end environment to do so, or you're looking to build voice and chat-based applications using Lex, which is the same service and the core brain of what the whole Alexa device is built on. All these services are here to give you the opportunity to build anything you can possibly dream of. But that comes back to Startup Day, right? I'm talking specifically about the technology and what we're doing on the tech side from AWS and from Amazon to help you. We understand that there's a lot of business needs and challenges. And so again, that's what this day is about. So you had the opportunity to hear about the services we're building and how you can be leveraging them, how to actually put them in place. But you also get the opportunity to hear from a large number of established entrepreneurs, VCs, and more. And I want to introduce our next VC, or actually our next speaker, who is Saul Klein, who is he's from local Globe. And he's done investments in companies like Citymapper, Transferwise, and more. So please give a warm introduction to our first presenter, Saul.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Saul. I'm a founding partner at Local Globe, which is a seed stage investment fund based here in London. And just a little bit of background before I kick off in terms of Amazon. So when I was a partner at Index Ventures, which is another VC in Europe, we started working with AWS in, I think, 2008. One of our portfolio companies, Playfish, which was a gaming company that got acquired by EA, decided that it didn't want to have a big infrastructure and needed to scale up. And it's been fascinating to me to see how first Playfish, and then you mentioned Supercell, which was another one of our investments, have really sort of leveraged this platform. And I know Jeff Bezos has another famous quote, which is, "It's always day one." And it's pretty amazing to see Amazon go from 0 to 20 billion in revenue in this business unit in 10 years. And I think what I'm excited about investing in startups is you can see that it's still really day one for AWS. So a little bit about us. We've been doing seed investing for about 15 years now. We have over 200 seed and pre-seed investments. Around 65% of them are in London. We got a team of 12 people, both on the investment side and on the operation side. It's a big team for a seed stage VC, but we believe that that journey from seed to Series A, that 18 to 24 months, really requires hands-on, value-added support from investors. A little bit about our journey. We, from pre-seed to seed, our friends at ASI are downstairs actually demonstrating today. Improbable, who some of you may have heard of, we seed invested, Transferwise, Zoopla, and I was part of the Skype team. So we've really seen the journey from seed to IPO. What we do, and the way we sort of think about the opportunities that you all have, is we think about investing in what we call practical science fiction. What does that mean? What it means is you have an idea that if you talk to people today, they think it's crazy, they think it won't work, they think it won't be important to people, but we think that it's the kind of thing that in 10 or 15 years' time, people will be saying, oh yeah, that's just a normal part of my life, like getting food delivered via Deliveroo or TransferWise, or buying a home on Zoopla, or getting around a city with Citymapper, or buying fashion on Farfetch, or taking a loan out on Funding Circle, etc. So that's what we do. Thematically, these are sort of the 4 big areas that really fascinate us at the moment. Deep tech, you heard about AI. There's AI, machine learning, robotics. There's a lot going on in that area, a lot going on in the UK, a lot going on in London, Cambridge, Oxford, Sheffield, Sussex, Bristol, Edinburgh, etc. New interfaces. I mean, obviously, there's Alexa. Amazon actually acquired a company in Cambridge to help build out the Alexa platform. They have a few hundred developers up there, so a lot of voice and new interface innovation happening in the UK. You got decentralization. I don't know how much today is going to be around blockchain. As you probably saw, Facebook have just taken their head of Messenger and put him on a blockchain team in the last 48 hours. So I think we're going to hear a lot about blockchain and decentralization in the next few years. And again, we're really excited by some of the what's going on in this area. Believe it or not, the most exciting project that we've seen globally in this space is actually happening in Stoke. Anyone from Stoke here? No one from Stoke here. Okay, someone from Stoke at the back, thank you very much. Well, 200 years ago, Stoke actually started the Industrial Revolution. So it's not impossible that the next phase of the information revolution is going to happen here, and it may not happen in London. We think it may happen in Stoke. And then you have personalized care, which involves genomics, et cetera. So these are areas we focus on. The way we think about what we do, and I just want to spend a few minutes on this, number one is we believe in playing total football, and not just because Ajax, Barcelona, and others used it to sort of win every single footballing championship in the world other than the World Cup, although the Spaniards did that. We think that, acting as a team is good, but you actually have to make decisions. So we look for founders and teams who can tackle hard problems and decide, when to make a move. And when you make a move, you make it and you don't look back. And what we're looking for is we say we're kind of searching for black swans. And black swans, as you probably know, are the outliers. They're the people who are dreaming up the science fiction ideas that everyone says is stupid. We can launch a rocket that lands again. That's really stupid. But, it's possible, and it's changed the nature of that industry. And this is something that we think a lot about. The waves that I talked about before, these waves, I'm going to see how well this clicks. These are waves that everyone in our industry knows about. You may not be able to talk about these things at your kids' schools. You may not be able to talk about these, on Sunday afternoon at the barbecue, but we all know these are the big waves. Knowing about the waves is irrelevant. If you want to be a tech writer, write about the waves. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you've got to surf on them. And what does that mean? It means that 10 years from now, if this is day one, you're able to be on a wave where you've built a $10 billion business, just like our friends at Amazon. And those are the founders that we look for. And I think people know that that's happening in the UK. This slide just shows you that last year, over $7.8 billion of venture capital was raised in the UK. That's almost double the year before. And you could go around France, Germany, Sweden, and Israel, and together that wouldn't amount to the $7.8 billion that was raised in the UK. So literally, outside of Silicon Valley and China, this is the third or fourth largest venture market in the world. So you're in a great place to be starting a company. You've got great support from AWS, so you got no excuses, basically. So enjoy today, enjoy the next 2 days. It's an amazing event. I wish I could use all of those 100+ services, but hopefully we'll work with some startups who do. So thank you.
Thank you. Saul, thank you very much. I think something that really resonated with me is the idea that you're looking for these surfers to ride these big waves, these next really big futuristic thoughts. These are not small startups that you're trying to build. These are lofty goals and lofty visions you might have. In order to do that, you can't build everything from scratch, which is why AWS is a great partner for you to do that. These managed services, again, are here to help you take on these big challenges. So to resonate his messaging, think big. These tools are here to take the biggest ideas and make them a reality today. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is actually a serial entrepreneur based here in London. He is founded actually 5 startups, one of those including AlertMe, which is, they were creators of the British Gas Hive app, eventually sold for about 100 million, and now is the founder of Device Pilot, who handles all operational management of IoT devices. So please, round of applause for Pilgrim.
Thanks, Mackenzie. It's great to be with you all here today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the early days of a startup, which hopefully you all recognize. You're a small team, and every member of the team finds they have to wear many hats because there's just a load of things that need doing. And so roles like maybe the CFO, you can't really justify a full-time CFO. So somebody has to wear the CFO's hat. And maybe you don't really want to do that. Maybe you're not really very good at it, but it just has to get done to build a complete company. And then as the company grows, you can start to hand off those hats to other people. You'll bring in a specialist CFO, and probably with some relief, you'll hand off the hat to them, and they'll do a better job. And I suppose the point really is that there are two things you need to think about in that. One is the fact that you'll be left with one hat, so have a think about which one hat you want that to be and make sure you'll be really good at that job. And the second thing is that you do have to hand off those hats, because if you don't, you'll be the jack of all trades that's the bottleneck to your company's growth. So hopefully that's a story that will resonate with all of you, and you can recognize that. But it's actually not quite what I wanted to talk about today, although it's a good analogy for it. What I wanted to talk about today is not so much your role in your company, but more your company's role in the market that it serves. I'm sure you're all innovative startups, and that means that by definition you're serving an early market. And it's characteristic of an early market that the players in it often find that they have to wear lots of hats. They have to do lots of things that perhaps they don't really want to do, perhaps they're not really very good at, but they have to do them because no one else is doing them. So to be an early player in the market, they have to do them. So an example of that would be at AlertMe, my last company, which built Hive. We had to design and build and ship eventually millions of connected devices into the home so that we could become the smart home operator that we wanted to be. It took a lot of time, it took a lot of money, some of which came from Saul. Thank you, Saul. And it's just what we had to do to be an early player in the market. But then bit by bit, as the market emerges, you start to notice more and more companies appearing in your market. And some of them will be doing pieces of what you're doing. So with AlertMe, we found that more companies were coming along who were delivering accessories for the smart home, things like cameras and so on. So now we no longer had to do those pieces, and we could hand over those hats to them. And we did that happily, and it was good for them, it was good for us. There's another way that you can hand off hats as well as you grow. In the early days, you probably have found that you've had to build pieces of software, pieces of infrastructure that you didn't really want to do. Perhaps you're not even that good at it, but it needed to get done because the pieces you needed weren't available off the shelf. Let's take a concrete example. So we're in the IoT business. So IoT companies typically find that they need a thing called a broker, which sits between the devices and the application. And in the early days of IoT, every company was having to build that broker themselves, perhaps using open source, but they had to modify it, deploy it, operate it, scale it. It was quite a hassle. And as more and more companies were starting to do that, vendors like AWS noticed that, hang on, maybe here's a market opportunity. Maybe if we built that broker once and we did a really good job of it, and we made it available as a scalable product that you could buy as a service, then maybe all those companies would buy that broker from us. And indeed, that's exactly what's happened. So Device Pilot deals with lots of companies in IoT, and more than half of the companies we deal with are now either using or planning to use AWS IoT. So that plan has really worked. And indeed, that same logic is why Device Pilot exists. We know that every company that deploys connected products will need a suite of tools to help them manage those products, to see what they've deployed, to measure whether it's working, to find devices that aren't working and understand why, and to automate the life cycle of the devices. And that's exactly what Device Pilot is. And by building it once and making it really good and selling it as a service, we think that that's hopefully a no-brainer for IoT companies to buy, not build. So there's two kinds of partnership I'm talking about there, sort of partners beside you in the market and infrastructure partners. And it is really important to look at these partners and actually partner with them. Because if you don't, what you're essentially doing as these companies emerge in your market is you're making them competitors. And there'll be hundreds of them and then thousands of them. And you can't possibly run a race and win against all of those companies. And you'll end up being the jack of all trades and the master of none. And that's a really uncomfortable position to be. So it's very important to partner. And I think when you partner, it's important to do it wholeheartedly. This is not just a sort of badge swapping exercise. So for example, when Device Pilot chose to partner with AWS, We took advantage of the Activate program to get some credits to help us get onto the platform. We have done various kinds of accreditation, IoT competency, advanced technology partner, and so on, to show the world that we do know what we're doing. We actually moved our entire platform pretty much onto serverless Lambdas, which has been an extremely good journey. Happy to share that journey with you privately if you're interested. We also engage in a lot of effectively co-marketing. We reference customers for AWS IoT, and they reference customers to us, which helps us both. And also, I suppose here today, here I am, I'm talking partly about Device Pilot, I'm partly endorsing AWS, but I'm also just trying to share some knowledge and some experience that I've had from my past life. And I think that kind of dynamic where partners work together to help the entire market grow is really what happens in an early ecosystem. It's very collaborative, in fact. There isn't a lot of head-to-head competition in an early market. It's really all about collaboration. But if you choose to ignore that and just keep on selling everything, then you will suffer from this problem that you'll become the jack of all trades. So it's very important to understand that there's really a window of opportunity, because eventually your market will mature and it will become more like the zero-sum competitive market that you might learn about if you do an MBA. And so during that window of opportunity, by collaborating, you can focus on doing the one thing you do really well and thereby become world-class before that market becomes highly competitive. So I suppose just to summarize my message really, I think the journey is that as an early player in the market, you will probably have to build more than you wanted to. And that's okay. Actually, being a jack of all trades in the early stage of the market is actually quite an asset, because it does allow you to deliver a complete proposition. But as the market emerges, as other players appear in it, it's really important to partner with them. And partnering, obviously, it helps them, it helps you. What it particularly helps you do is focus, and focus on wearing that one hat that you want to be left with when the market matures. Thank you very much.
Pilgrim, thank you. I really love the messaging around really focusing again on the product. You're as an early stage company, there's these services and tools that are out there that help you get that product built, so focus on what's important to your business. As that business starts to grow, there's a lot of common patterns and trends you see and similar challenges that a lot of startups have at each one of these different stages. And one of those, as you get larger, is around the growth of people and more. And our next speaker found kind of a love and appreciation of these types of growing pains, and she brought her experience and expertise in dealing with these to Deliveroo, where she's now the Senior Platform Engineering Manager there at Deliveroo. So please, round of applause for our next speaker, Amy.
Good morning, everyone. Just for my own curiosity, just a quick raise of hands. Who here in the room kind of identifies maybe more on the business or product or leadership side? Can you raise your hands for me? Okay, fair amount. And who here sort of sees themselves more technical staff, engineers, data scientists? Okay, wow, it's actually, just for the folks at the front, it's about 50-50, maybe a little bit more weighted towards the tech staff, but there's quite a few leaders and business types here. So just to build on some of the themes from Saul, who's been a lovely investor in quite a few of the companies that I've had the fortune to work at. Thank you, Saul. And also Pilgrim talking about how we partner with people. I want to talk today about how at a high growth startup you focus on scale, and one of the ways you achieve that scale is by partnering with people. So Deliveroo has partnered a lot with AWS. They've been a key part of our story this year. So the first thing, just this is not the part that's closest to my heart, but one of the key things that I've learned at the 3 different startups that I've been at is how you scale people. And one of the most important things you can do, it's kind of obvious, right, is to scale your talent. You got to get the right people recruited, you got to get those right people onboarded, and once they're in your organization, you got to make sure that they're really happy and excited and love coming to work and are doing their best work for you. Beyond that, I think it's actually really important to put a lot into your actual recruitment pipeline. This is something that I've seen in all of the places I've worked, but Deliveroo is nailing it, and it's just making sure that you have this constant pipeline of constantly great people coming through the door. And I think it's an important message that having that recruitment pipeline constantly on, constantly bringing good people to the door is the difference between maintaining the status quo in your tech organization and being able to deliver a new feature or move to market quickly. So you have to pay attention to that, or you have to have someone who's paying attention to it. The second thing that's kind of a key takeaway from the 3 places I've been is scaling process. It's not about scaling to become very hierarchical and bureaucratic and be slow to move. It's about dismantling the hero culture. In the early days of a startup, everyone does everything. Everyone moves fast. Everyone's part. I think it was Steve was telling me this great story about in the early days, it was 20 people and you sat around one table. And so everything could be done just right then and there at the desk. What happens when you get to that late stage of growth is you get to a certain amount of people where you don't actually know all the faces anymore, and you don't know all the names, and the old ways of getting stuff done just start to erode or break or kind of have gaps. And you really have to take it seriously about making sure that the team can still deliver if Tommaso has to be off sick for a day or two, or that a key architectural decision is going to get made even if Greg Beach is on holiday. So it's really, really important to scale just enough process so that the people who built you can take a break, can put down some of the load or share the load and recharge themselves. And so that all the new people who you're bringing in, you have something to do, they have something to get stuck into, to feel excited about, to be motivated about. But the real reason I'm here today, I think, is to talk about scaling platform. And this is sort of a little bit of a celebration kind of public speaking event for me, because when I started at Deliveroo in April, we had just come to the realization that the third-party platform that we used on top of AWS was going to be something that we were going to have to move away from to deliver the key strategies of the business. And so I started working with Liam and Rob and Powan from AWS, started planning what will this look like, how will we do this. We took advantage of really good strategic startup account management at AWS, and this was actually for me the second time I'd worked with Liam. So I really encourage you guys, if you're looking at doing a startup, to use those services in account management to get that breadth of experience about what other people are doing or what best practices are, or about trends or key decisions that are going to come rushing at you that maybe are not your bread and butter, the thing that you want to be focusing on, and using AWS in that way has been really crucial in actually the last 2 startups that I've been at, but especially at Deliveroo. The second thing is taking advantage of the technical side of what they offer. So then I had to build a team. By July, we were actually we'd actually vetted all of our design decisions with AWS. We'd taken advantage of the well-architected review. We'd hired the premium support. Powan was sitting with the team every Thursday, just kind of going through things. And we'd come up with the strategy for what the new platform was going to be able to do as we grew the business, but also the strategy for how we were going to roll that out and really make it adopted widely. It's my favorite quote from Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. But how do you build something that's so good, but also reduces the barrier to entry and keeps a feature team's throughput really high? How do you give them a replacement platform and move them to it as seamlessly and as smoothly as possible so that the business strategy doesn't even notice that you've just actually changed both of the wings and the jet engines on the airplane while everything was going? And this was the thing that we were trying to tackle. And it was really exciting. We started doing it. We made key decisions like no big bang approach, we're an agile company, start shipping from the bottom up, and have the feature teams and the services use everything as you go. And that way, in month 4, there are no surprises from your data layer. You know what your RDS instances are doing, you know how teams are using them, you know what that deployment looks like. By month 2, we were shipping compute with ECS and containers. We're talking about migration. We've actually spent the bulk of our time now not building the infrastructure using all native AWS kind of technologies, but actually rolling it out so that it's successful, so that teams just pick up, spend a day doing some refactoring, not even refactoring, rebuilding of packages, maybe containerizing something that was never containered, and moving it. So in January, we started, our first service went live on the new infrastructure in January. By the end of April, all 50 services were serving production traffic in AWS on the new infrastructure. And that has been a really crucial thing. And we couldn't have done it if we hadn't partnered both on the strategic and how we grow our business and how we grow our platform side with AWS, but also on the technical side, using ECS, using Route 53. That's what my team's spent a lot of time in the weeds with. Using RDS, using all of these services to make sure that we can spend our time serving our customers who are the other engineers. So thank you very much.
What's great about AWS is that we work with some of the world's largest startups like Deliveroo. Our solution architects are there learning about what challenges they're facing, what best practices they're putting in place, offering guidance that we've seen that work in the industry, but also taking what's working well for them and then sharing that back out with all of our customers. And this is published through a lot of different mediums, things like our startup blog, where we have guest engineering blog posts, speaking opportunities. You can hear these customers and the challenges they're facing and how they're solving them. And also through our well-architected framework, which Amy spoke about earlier. It's these great engineering leaders, not just in the world, but here specifically in London, they're help driving the next trends and the next ways that people are building. And to hear from another great engineering leader here in London, our next speaker, prior to doing what he's doing now, founded a company and helped grow it as a CTO from 3 to about 130 employees, which eventually sold over to, was it Expedia? Experian? Close, sorry. And today, leads engineering for Transferwise here in London with a team of about 70. So please, warm introduction for Steve.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Good morning. I'm Steve. I'm an engineering lead at Transferwise, and I've been with Transferwise for just over 3 years and seen quite a few different challenges during that time. And I hope to talk about some of the kind of less expected things that you might have to deal with, and also touch on kind of the idea of replatforming that Amy talked about, particularly in the context of a high-growth startup. So before I do that, I just want to go right back to the start. Transferwise was founded by 2 friends, and they had a shared problem, and that was that they were both effectively being paid in the wrong currency. So one was being paid in euros, and they had a mortgage in pounds, and the other one was being paid in pounds and had all of their expenses in euros. And every month, they would move that money home through a bank, and it would be slow, it would be expensive, and it would be inconvenient because of the kind of old systems they had to deal with. And what they did is they came up with a solution. They would agree on an amount each month, and then they would look at the mid-market rate, and they would pay into each other's bank accounts. And so by doing that, it meant they didn't have to convert the currency. They didn't lose 5% in the ether somewhere as it switched. And that very first version, it was a proper MVP. It was just a Skype chat that they had between them. And once they figured that out, they were like, OK, this kind of works. Maybe this would be helpful for some other people. They decided to build a real system. And their first real system was a spreadsheet. And with the spreadsheet, they kind of scaled out, and they found some other people, friends who had a similar issue, and they managed to kind of prove out this concept. But we've come quite a long way since then. So today, Transferwise is moving billions of pounds worth of currency each month. It has millions of customers. Over 1,000 people work at Transferwise across 9 offices all around the world. And we've had to face challenges that couldn't have been envisaged when we were dealing with those spreadsheets back in the day. I was reminded recently of one of those things that happened, and it's a kind of good example of what we didn't anticipate. So about 2.5, 3 years ago, we received our first denial of service attack. And at the time, it's fair to say we were not ready for that at all. I think it's very easy to look at some of the bigger tech companies around and think, oh, they've got everything under control, but don't always believe it. In that situation, what happened is someone fired the traffic at our site went down, we were down for about 2 hours. There was an email that came along with it saying, you need to pay us some Bitcoin into this address, and if you don't do it, then tomorrow we're going to attack again, and we're going to keep your site down until you pay, and the amount will keep going up. And so kind of panic stations, we had a war room in 2 different offices on a 24-hour video link, just trying to figure out a solution for this. Well, in that 24 hours, we managed to get a solution together, and then the attack came, and we were OK. But the reason I wanted to highlight this example was because it's what we did in that 24 hours. DDoS protection is a thing that you obviously don't build yourself, unless you're in the business of DDoS protection. We could have done, with a platform like AWS, you could use auto-scaling and elastic load balancers, and you could make something that would work. But it's not the right thing to do. And I think we all know that it's not the right thing to do. The reason it's not the right thing to do is because it's not our mission. At Transferwise, this is our mission. So it's the goal of being able to move money internationally and do it instantly, do it conveniently, and do it for free. There's no fundamental reason why it should cost money to move money around. It's really just bits moving through networks and flipping in databases. So we don't want to build DDoS protection because we want to be doing this. I'm sure it's the same for you. I'm sure many of you have ambitious goals, ambitious missions. And you don't need to be doing these things that are a distraction. If we want to achieve those missions, then we need to get to scale. I tend to think that for us to feel like we've really achieved this, we would need to get to, say, 50% market share in a big market for us. So if I was to take the example of the UK, there's about 60 million people in the UK. That means about 30 million people. If we were growing at 100,000 users a month, that would be about 1 million new customers every year. Right? If I want to get to 30 million customers, it's going to take 30 years. Well, I love Transferwise, but I don't want to be there for 30 years. So the only way we're going to get there is through exponential growth. Exponential growth is a particular challenge for a technologist, for any of us who work on these platforms. And the reason for that is because the solutions that we put in place today aren't necessarily going to work when we're at multiple times our current size. Amy talked a bit about the kind of replatforming they're doing at Deliveroo, and we have a very similar story at Transferwise. We've been on this journey of a monolith to a microservice architecture. And it's a pretty common story. You hear a lot of it in blog posts at the moment because a lot of companies are doing it. And the reason you hear it often is because the monolith was a great solution. At the start, it meant we could go through those first few multiples of growth, and we didn't have to worry about things like a complex infrastructure or distributed systems. But it's only going to take you so far. So we've moved to microservices. The next stage for us is a containerized infrastructure. We believe that that's going to take us, hopefully, as far as we need to go in terms of our scale. But containers didn't exist 7 years ago when Transferwise started, so that wasn't really an option to us back then. Even maybe 3 years ago, yes, you could run containers, but using them to scale, geographically and to auto-scale wasn't really an option. It was maybe an option for the big tech companies who had a lot of expertise in that area. But now, you don't need that much expertise. You have platforms like Elastic Container Services that you can run on. The very interesting bit of that for me is that it means the architectures that you could use now from the start look very similar to the architectures that the bigger tech companies are evolving towards. And I think what we might see, and what I hope we see, is like the next generation of startups are maybe not going to be telling the same replatforming stories that the previous generation are taking. I think it's now possible to adopt things early that can take you a very long way. You'll have to evolve through that process, but hopefully nothing fundamental is going to change. And so my kind of advice to you is that you should leverage the platforms that let you focus on your mission. That's why you're there, right? It's to keep your customers happy, right? Let somebody else deal with the stuff underneath. And these guys are a pretty good choice if you need someone to partner with.
That couldn't be more true. I mean, I think about a lot of the engineering teams that I ran back at these startups in New York City. There's this common problem that happened, which was when they were given a challenge or given a task, there's this habit for engineers to sometimes say, well, I've solved this previously at another company. I know how to do this. Let me just use the tools that I'm comfortable and familiar with. And they don't look at what's out there today. And as you heard from many of the speakers today, these services, again, are here to help you build more efficiently. 5, 10 years ago, a day one startup would spend all their time focused on building an MVP. Right? They would have to start building all of this tooling and automation around build pipelines and testing and automating this all to try to build efficiency into an engineer's productive day. And that's what they spent the first, I would say, 1 or 2 years building. And after they finally harnessed that and they said, OK, we streamlined everything, then they were focused on just product and that's it. But there was all that tweaking and tuning in their environment to try to build that productivity. And a good example of one of the tools or services that I point a lot of customers to when they say, I have an idea, I'm going to start building on AWS, where do I begin? Is a service we launched back in November at reInvent called CodeStar. CodeStar encapsulates all of the core modules you need, basically pointing out a repo. It could be GitHub. It could be code commit. And every time a commit goes in there, it will establish and build your entire pipeline. It's modular, so you can add in load testing or unit testing or security testing in there. And it'll handle deploys out to whatever infrastructure you want to deploy to, whether it's serverless with Lambda, whether it's Elastic Beanstalk, EC2, or more. And then as you start to outgrow it, you can start swapping out each one of these components. And that's extremely powerful. It means no longer instead of spending the first couple years getting this whole CI/CD pipeline in place. Every company has access to that from day one, and they can start pushing out not just code once or twice a day, but 15 or 20 times a day, and all in an automated fashion. It's this power that I'm really excited about. So I encourage you, and I encourage you to share this with your team, is every time you're about to tackle a problem, look online, look at the blog, look at what customers are sharing, and learn from them. Find out what the new way is to approach it, because it might be a slight learning curve at first, but the benefits long-term will come without a doubt. I want to point everybody again, if you download the app, please rate the session. Let us know what we can add to it, what we can take out, what we can improve that'll make it even more valuable for you next time. We're also going to move right along into our customer engagement track. And this is available for both technical and business. There's a little bit of content for everybody. So stick here, stay here, and please welcome our next presenter, who is the UK Startup Segment Lead for AWS, Mr. Liam McClary.